The Chicago band Cheer Accident was founded in 1981 by Thymme Jones and has remained consistently active to this day. Their most recent and 20th album, Chicago 20, was released in 2019, and 3 more are arriving this fall. While sometimes labeled progressive rock, this label is nowhere near adequate to describe Cheer Accident's sound and approach. Throughout their career, they've morphed consistently in lineup and in style, while always maintaining their own fascinating and unique aesthetic. How to describe it? Well, to hear Tim tell it, you kind of have to be there. So, today we have special, super secret, not so secret celebrity guest, Thymme Jones of Cheer Accident. And also with me, I have Connor Riley from my band, The Mercury Tree, and our other band, Nick Prol and the Proletarians. And we have the pseudo presence of Nick Prol, our great friend, who has contributed a few questions for this interview as well. So,
hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick. Is he going to respond?
That was a maneuver.
Isn't everything a what?
It was the high neck.
The high Nick maneuver. That's wonderful. See, this is the kind of thing that you, the audience, can expect throughout this entire interview, is little nuggets of gold like that. So, Tim, you know, believe it or not, not everyone in the world actually knows about Cheer Accident. So if you had to describe Cheer Accident to someone who was a complete beginner, what would be your elevator pitch?
Well, first of all, you're wrong. The last person in the world to have not heard of Cheer Accident, I just gave them a pedicab ride yesterday, and I told them all about us. So everyone in the world does know who Cheer Accident is now.
Well,
but I guess
when you explained to that person, you must have had quite the explanation at that point with so much practice.
I admire that technique. Yes, I guess what I said to this person is you kind of have to be there. But you know, whenever anyone asks me, like, because you know, I encounter a lot of people every week with this pedicabbing gig, and so sometimes the whole band thing comes up, and I begrudgingly say that I'm in a band, you know, because like, you know, no one's in a band, right?
A few
and
people,
you know. Their first question is, well, what kind of music do you guys do? And like,
I hate that question so much.
I mean, I just kind of gave up on,
yeah.
I don't know if it was laziness or just oversaturation or what, but at some point I kind of just gave up on it because I don't know where to begin. I mean, some people call us prog, obviously, but like, I don't know, like the stuff that we like from the 70s, like they weren't calling themselves prog at the time.
What were they calling that at the time?
Well, I don't think they were calling themselves anything. I think they were just doing what made sense for them to do in whatever configuration they were, you know, whatever group of people, they did what they did. They pursued their own trajectory, and that's.
Oh, and it was new. They didn't have a name for it yet. You know, it was like, we don't know what this is, but we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I would point to the Beatles as some sort of liftoff point. You know, it's like taking the more ambitious elements of the Beatles and going in various different directions, you know,
right.
Like a European sensibility, you know, like taking rock and adding these European elements that hadn't really been present before.
Tell us more about those European elements. What does that mean to you, or to people who might not understand that?
I guess I mostly think of classical as opposed to, you know, jazz or R&B, although they had those elements as well, but they were really pushing this sort of, well, depending on which band it is that we're talking about, like either you have like the 20th century classical approach, like, and that would be someone like Henry Cow would be more in that vein. But you have people like Genesis who sounded much more romantic. Yes was sort of a kitchen sink,
Right.
be more than anyone else from that era, because you could hear funk and all different kinds of classical influences. Yeah, they were all over the place, but still had a cohesive sound. Somehow.
So you think you bring a lot of classical influence into Cheer Accident? Because that's not, I don't know if I hear that directly, but I could certainly be, because you've made it such a unique mix. But are there classical composers that are an influence on you specifically?
There definitely are, but I don't think we've ever fetishized the classical influence. Like that's my problem with some of the, well, maybe most of the prog bands, or what gets called prog, is they sort of fetishized that aspect of it, and that's not what's interesting to me about that stuff. That's kind of what drew me in. I'm like, ooh, this sounds classical, and
Right.
like that in a novel sort of way that interested me initially. But then I started getting into like how, again, I'll use Yes as an example. They really created a new type of music. Like they weren't just like, oh, we're a rock band playing, Vivaldi or something. Like they, at their most interesting, they developed a new hybrid, and like you don't really think about the individual elements. You just think, oh, this is impactful, and obviously they're coming from a lot of different places, but they're not really making a big deal about it.
Right. I think it's interesting when that stuff is brought into rock music, because there's so much cultural baggage with like sort of an orchestral sound. There's sort of a almost illusion of significance just that the instrumentation brings, or like pomposity, or like intellectualism. And sometimes it can seem very false. Like when they have a pop song and they're just like, we're going to add a string section. Of course, the string section it's like 8 players playing 3 notes, through some normal rock part of the song. And it's just like, they just wanted to put some people on stage in tuxedos to make it look like they're doing something significant.
Yep.
I think, of course, the Beatles, which you brought up, were an excellent example. George Martin, I think, was probably responsible for a lot of the symphonic orchestration that was added to their songs. And I think, of course, in their case, that was extremely effective. But I don't, it's funny because no one's really copied that in the way that they did it. I don't know if you could, or if it would be effective.
You must have never heard XTC.
Well, okay, yes, I do love XTC. That's a pretty rare example, I would say, though.
Yeah, they're actually the best example I can think of as far as a band that took the Beatles ball and ran with it. Like
Absolutely.
They really Beatles into the 80s, really, in a genuine way, not in a, I don't know, not in a overly contrived or fabricated way. It seems very internalized,
Absolutely. I can't really think of anyone else who seems like very clearly inspired by the Beatles, yet very much their own thing. I mean, Andy Partridge is such an individual songwriter. But with the orchestral stuff, they didn't do a whole lot of that up until when they did their Apple Venus album. That was very late in their career. but that was sort of the culmination of that integration of the sort of symphonic sound.
Definitely, and that actually doesn't strike me as very Beatles-esque, but I think they did some pretty Beatles-esque orchestration in on Skylarking. That was quite a bit earlier.
Yeah.
That was like 1986, something like that.
That I love that album. It's very psychedelic, very warm, and again, just like his vocal melodies were what grabbed me. They were so weird. They would go in these directions that you just like, what? Why? This is happening? Really? But then you grow to love it, and you can't get anything else like that. So I actually did not realize you're an XTC fan, but that's terrific. How long have you been listening to them?
I started listening to them in 1981.
Wow, isn't that the same year you founded the band?
Yeah. Actually, there's very much a parallel there, because there was this show on WNUR at like, I think it started at like midnight, maybe. I think it went from midnight to 3, and it was called Outer Limits, and they just played like all kinds of off the beaten path stuff. And I remember they played Travels and Neil on.
Oh man, that is a killer song. The drumming in particular, but the whole mix. What struck you about that? I mean, it probably, for me, it really blew me away the first time I heard that song. What was your impression?
Yeah, I mean, everything hit me. Like, I loved that drum pattern. I mean, I love Terry Chambers. He's an amazing drummer. That drum pattern, the drum sound. I mean, I was pretty into Steve Lillywhite at that time. His production, I got pretty burnt out on it eventually, but you know, that's not his fault. He was onto something cool. He did some U2 albums around that time. He did Gabriel's third album. So he helped invent, you know, the 80s drum sound.
That big drum sound, which I feel like you kind of used on Sever Roots Tree Dies, that seemed like maybe the big drum sound was inspired by that.
Probably. I mean, that was mostly Phil's doing, you know. It was like we recorded that at his studio, the studio he worked at. That's before he was in the band. Yeah, I actually thought you were going to talk about Garbage Head, but that's more of the distorted approach to the big drum sound. And then when we did Babies Shouldn't Smoke, we said to Albini, we're like, yeah, remember that drum sound we got for Garbage Head? We want that for the whole album. And he was just like, you want that for the whole album? It, like, he was just became deflated. And now that I'm the became deflated, could that be a Mercury Tree song?
It's usually just the reaction of our audience. But yes, I am going to write that down, as I write down so many things that may later become a title or lyric.
Here's a tribute to our audience. It's called Became Deflated. But yeah, so now that I've spent a couple decades being sort of the engineer by default of Sheer Accident, I understand how Steve felt, because it's just like, okay, well, I guess I know what the drums are going to sound like on every song, you know. But we just really wanted to drive that home, and we wanted Babies to be pretty relentless, and it's a very intense album.
Very beautifully noisy.
Um, hey,
Oh no.
knew that wasn't going to be forever. It's a delicate balance.
All right. Well, have we summed up Cheer Accident? I don't know if we have, but Cheer
Well, you
Accident.
used
Probably not.
you actually used a phrase that damn it, I should have mentioned it right at the. What was your description of Andy Partridge's vocal melodies?
I don't remember exactly, but I mean,
I think
they're very. You don't expect. Oh, repeat that.
Like,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're doing this now, or
right?
Something like
I was not expecting that note there, and then the next note after it.
I think that sums up Cheer Accident. Actually, like his approach to melody lines is our approach to our own history. Like, oh, what does that do? Let's go over there now. Like taking something and sort of extrapolating. Like I think you'll notice, because I've talked to you about music enough. Like, you've probably noticed that we'll have like one little element on one album, and then on another album we'll just pursue that little element, you know?
Right.
Like on Baby Shouldn't Smoke, we had a couple like pop moments, and then and actually a guy that comes in and advises us to do pop music, and then we did the Y album, which that happened. That's just gonna probably.
Why indeed?
What?
I said why indeed, as your camera fell over. But so I think you're referring to that wonderful answering machine message.
Hi, Chris. In my opinion, you should get some people who know how to sing in your band, and you should try just regular pop music, with verse, chorus.
There's got to be a story behind that that little snippet.
That was a guy that would sort of show up at a lot of our parties back when Chris and I both lived in Streamwood, and he would always have immediate critical things to say of the music that was playing at the time. Like, actually, I specifically remember cranking In Praise of Learning by Henry Cow. And he walked in and he's like, turn off this garbage. What is this? And my Lane was just like, well, you don't have to be here, because he came uninvited, and just he wasn't into the more avant side of things. So I guess that's sort of the backstory.
Was he kind of like yanking your chain, or was that like pretty much serious advice that he was giving to you?
I think he was 100% serious, actually. I think he knew that we had the talent to pull something off, to pull off more pop type stuff, and I think he genuinely wanted us to go in that direction.
Well,
so,
what I love in that song that like there's that to me it strikes me as like very insulting message, and then it is followed by this just like giant whammy of this incredibly fast, intense song that comes right after it. And to me, it's almost like a fuck you. This is what we're gonna do in response, and it's like a mission statement in a way. So I think it's an incredibly strong way to start that album. So let me just try and wrap up this portion here, trying to explain Cheer Accident to a general audience. Obviously, you've been making albums for, I think the first one was 87, so that's coming up on 35 years of making albums, which is incredible. All sorts of sounds and styles. We could spend a lot of time just even sort of making subcategories, because there's a lot of clear sort of subcategories of your sound. Like, to me, there's like sort of the noisy 90s stuff, and then there's this sort of piano pop stuff. There's a stuff that sounds a little more RIO, but everything cross-pollinates, and it's really, really interesting how you move from one thing to another. Going back to the Beatles, of course, you had a big Beatles influence come out with the Y album. Oh, that's probably the most, the first big notable example of that sound, although I think there was some stuff like that on Vasectomy as well. But, that's also interesting because that was released after Babies Shouldn't Smoke. And, that's almost like another answer to that guy's message, because then you did sort of release a pop album.
Right.
So,
yeah, well, we take requests.
was that something you were planning anywhere, or what led to, it was rather, at the time must have seemed like a stark change of direction.
It definitely related to the fact that Phil was in the band at that point, and Babies Shouldn't Smoke. I mean, he loved the music we were doing for Babies Shouldn't Smoke, but he was always sort of to the outside of it. He like that wasn't really in his wheelhouse as far as what type of music he tended to write and play. And Phil and I intersected pretty heavily in the pop realm, especially like Bacharach type stuff. And I was living with him at the time, Streamwood Phase 2, and we worked on some stuff together. He was always writing, pretty pop type stuff, and I always had that side. So he and I encouraged each other. And, after he was in the band for about a year, we had accrued a fair amount of that stuff. And to me, it just seemed like an interesting next step, after Babies. Like, we had done Dumbass, which is pretty heavy and to the point, and Babies, which is less to the point, but still, pretty abrasive and heavy. And I'm like, let's take a left turn here. And that created issues.
What sort of issues?
I've talked about before, but that's where Chris and I developed a bit of a disconnect, because he wanted to stay on the path of the more
aggressive stuff. Yeah.
What was that?
The more aggressive, noisy stuff.
Yep. Like he really thought that we were onto something with that. And I mean, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It felt right to me. And I really wanted to include Phil's influence in a big way, at that time. And it's not, I mean, this became a lot clearer as the years went on, but it's not like we're making any sort of like prediction when we make an album. It's like, oh, this is what we are now. It's like, no, it's always just a part of what we are. And that's probably the most enjoyable thing about being in this band to me, is that we can just shoot off in any direction at any time. And it's a cumulative thing. It's not an either or thing.
Yeah,
so
well,
the directions that you take, because Cheer Accident it takes a lot of different musical directions, or took a lot of different musical directions over the course of your career. So you're saying that's more kind of guided by just kind of the people that are in the band and where their heads are at, versus like making a conscious decision to like, here's a pop album, here's a prog album, here's a noise rock album. It's just kind of a factor of like, who are the collaborators and what are their influences?
Yeah.
That's accurate.
Yeah, it definitely has more to do with that. And more broadly, it's really just working with what you have at whatever given moment you're in. It's really improvisation when it comes right down to it, because you're using the same kind of intuition. It's just stretched out through a larger expanse of time, you know. But we've been doing a lot of improvisation. I mean, we always have, but we've really been pursuing the improvisation thing the last few years. And
more improvisation.
That's the third time that's happened, or the fourth. I became what was that?
Oh, he just said it was more improvisation. The phone falling off.
Well,
that worked out kind of well.
It's an example because this is the type of thing, just like, you know, in a Cheer Accident song, where it could have been an accident or it could be completely on purpose. I would believe it if Tim told me later that he'd been intentionally knocking down the phone at certain points in order to create like an unexpected audience reaction, because that seems like the type of thing that happens in that band. But so I want to ask one more thing about that before we get to Connor's stuff. So with the Y album, you know, I'm sure some people could have seen it as, well, you were doing this sort of noisy, inaccessible noise rock, and then you decided to make something much more accessible to try and sell out with this like pretty pop music. I'm sure that's not what was happening, but is this part of your thinking at all? Like, who is our audience? Are they going to join us in this new direction that we're taking, or is that even something you worry about?
Gosh, I'm editing myself internally here because I don't want to gratuitously alienate any of my friends, but sometimes I don't care about that. But no, the most enjoyable thing about coming out with the Y album at that time is it completely had nothing to do with wanting to be more commercial. And in fact, we kind of knew we would be alienating a lot of the people who had liked us up to that point. So it was like making a pop album in order to become less popular. So that's fun, right?
Right.
And if we had pursued, as you described it, the more abrasive, less accessible side of things, we probably would have gotten a bigger following at that time, you know, in the long run.
Well, you could have, you could have just decided that was your sound and that's what the band was, and still be playing it today if that was what everyone loved. But instead you sort of made a choice, and almost kind of like a statement like, no, we're not just this thing that we were on the last album or the last two albums. We're also this entirely other thing that's also us, which in a way sort of like gives you the opening to keep doing that. And the people who stick with you through that will know to expect another big shift. And I think it's really fun for those of us who are lucky enough, not lucky for you, but lucky for us, that we come in late and have 30 years of music to look over, because it's almost like whatever mood you're in, you can find something for it. It's almost like every genre under the sun that you've done. And that's something that is really addictive and makes Cheer Accident music really fun to show to people. So I think
that was that was a good way of putting that when you said it paved the way to keep being able to do it that way. Like that's exactly what happened when we did the Y album. It's like, all right, all bets are off. Like,
you're setting the expectation of lack of expectation.
Yes.
Yep. And yeah, it's always a really satisfying thing when someone emails us or something and they say, oh, I just discovered you guys, and like they will have like bought the whole catalog from our website, and they're going through the like everything like in a fairly short amount of time. That's really interesting to be able to witness that process. It's like just a really condensed, I don't know, phenomenon or so. It's like, oh, it's like the Big Bang or something. The bag. It's a Bing bag.
Full of bings. Yes, and because it took you years and years to work out these different styles and create all these different albums, but the listener can just like jam it all together into this way too intense. Like, nobody could have created it that fast, or maybe in the future they'll be able to.
Yeah.
But
and
go ahead.
That goes what I was saying about improvisation before my phone collapsed. Like, because they like people that are just discovering this do get to perceive it more as an improvisation. Like, oh, they're going here now. That this little move had them shooting off in this direction, and like that's that's interesting to me. And it like, I don't know, it's fun getting to watch it unfold through others' eyes and ears.
I bet. It probably gives you maybe some new perspective in some way. Or
Yeah.
not. I don't know. I think it is Connor's turn to ask some questions because he has some great questions for you. And then I have lots more as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to know more about just kind of how the original Chair Accident band kind of got together, and what were the circumstances surrounding that. If you could just kind of like give a brief history of kind of your original formation.
When you say the original formation, are you talking about when we became a band proper and we're playing in front of people? Or are you talking about the high school origin where we were just making cassettes for our own amusement?
Well, I guess maybe a little bit of both. Like, when did it progress from one to the other? You know?
Okay. So in high school, I would get together and jam with Jim Drummond, who just came up with these spontaneous vocal lines and words. He would just conjure stuff. He would just take stuff out of the air, and we would have these improvisations, and some of it would be noisy and completely freeform, but a lot of the time they would be improvised songs where I would do like the chord progression on piano, and he would just start singing words and melodies. And then we had this guy, Mike Greenleaves, playing drums. He's still a good friend of mine. He's in the band Tar, who have recently gotten back together-ish. Like, they're releasing a bunch of stuff. But the three of us would get together and spontaneously write songs. And then we had a host of other people. Steve Past on drums, Kevin Nosted on bass and guitar. Just a really great like community of people that were willing to just do anything, you know. That I was so fortunate to have that experience in high school. And then Jim moved to Indiana, and I joined this band which was much more in the sort of, this phrase makes me cringe, but more in the jazz rock vein, like definitely doing more jazz type stuff.
Okay.
And I was in that band with Chris Block. I was the keyboard player and trumpet player. I didn't really play any drums. Jeff Beck, one F and no C, was the drummer. He's a really good drummer. And that was also a band I was in with Ross Feller, who now he's in the current formation of Cheer Accident. You could say the version that most recently toured at all. So I learned a lot playing in that band, and Cheer Accident, who still hadn't really become a band proper, like at all. I didn't actually think we ever would. We were still making cassettes, and then broke up, and I started playing with Jeff Libersher more regularly, and we lived together also in Streamwood.
And were you playing drums this whole time? Just sorry to interrupt. Just so I'm clear, you were playing drums primarily, because I know you also play lots of other things. But with these jams, you were primarily playing drums.
Well, like I said, I wasn't playing drums in at all, but when we're making these cassettes, I was the main drummer. And, we would get together and jam still, and I would usually play drums. But I didn't actually own my own drum set until I was, I think, 23. I told this story on, I think, I don't know, maybe it was on the cutting room floor. I haven't seen it in a while, but there's that documentary, Romantic Warriors. And I told the story about how my mom forbade me to own a drum set in high school because, drums are really loud and obnoxious. So that's why I didn't own my own drums till I was like 23. But the punchline, we often had two different drum sets in the basement. Like Mike Greenlees would have actually it was Mike Greenlees' brother. John Greenlees' drum set would be in our basement, and Jim Drummond's drum set would be in our basement. So I guess since they weren't my drum set, they weren't as loud or something. But I did spend most of high school with other people's drum sets in the house.
Was piano your first instrument?
No. Well, I mean, it's the first instrument I touched. So, yeah, I guess you could call it.
It seems like you have a deep connection to the piano as like maybe your main composition vehicle, or just one of your main modes seems to be you at the piano.
Yeah, it's definitely where I write. Well, that's the whole thing in itself. Like the more, this gets tricky already here. The more, for lack of a better phrase, obviously musical stuff is written on piano, but I like to paint myself into a corner by like playing a couple notes on like out of tune auto harp, or like some drum beat, or like or any kind of like taking a sound and going from there and like, how can I turn this into a song somehow? That's
really good.
That's a completely different approach than sitting down at the piano and coming up with a chord progression and writing melodies over that. It's a very different problem.
Absolutely. Like with your subcategories of songs, that's definitely one of the things I notice. You can tell like what seems to have been written at the piano and what seems to have been put together some other way, and yet you do both, and they go on the same albums and they fit together somehow as well.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, it would be nice to maybe be less obvious about that. I'm working on it. Like maybe not be able to tell that something was written on the piano, you know.
Well,
I mean,
and how much? I mean, some of it. You were talking about jamming on this and that and the other thing with lots of different people. So I was also kind of curious how much of your composition is jam oriented, like how much comes out of jams and how much is like you or Jeff kind of hammering one thing out and then coming in being like, hey guys, here's this thing that we can work on, how much of it comes from jams versus like demos and things?
That's a good question because the approaches are so disparate. It depends on the era of the band. It depends on the song.
Right.
Like,
true.
I'll give you an example of a song that was very much group composed. From Fear Draws Misfortune, there's a song called Humanizing the Distance. That's one of the more collaborative songs that I can think of because Jeff had this guitar riff, and Alex immediately came up with this sort of atonal bass line, and I came up with the drum to add a different element. It's very polyrhythmic.
Yeah.
And we worked on the basic structure of that song as a trio. Like, we really hashed most of the foundation of that song out, like in a room together, at various different times. It took many hours. And then I wrote most of the overdub stuff. But that's one of my favorite things to do, is to take a foundation that 3 or 4 people came up with and write something that kind of extends over the whole thing, So that was a very democratic song. But then, for the last 20 years, Jeff has been writing complete songs and demoing them up.
Right.
And I've always done quite a bit of that. So it really just depends on the song. But I love both approaches. I love a song that's mostly just one person's vision, but I also love the collaboration thing.
Well, and then the next song on Fear Draws Misfortune was also the last song on the album, and one of my favorite Cheer Accident songs is Your Weak Heart. And that one, kind of starts with like more of a piano ballad kind of thing that sounds like it could have been, just you writing out this piano part, and then ends with the same thing. But then in the middle, it's just like prog madness where it just kind of goes all over the place. And so that one, I don't know if it's true or not, but to me, it feels like it's kind of got a little bit of both, where, you had this piano part, and then you've got like the beginning, you've got the end, and then maybe you kind of collaborated on the middle. Like that sounds like it could have come out of a jam. Is that accurate, or was there a different method of composition going on there?
That's a really interesting juxtaposition you just made. Interestingly, I wrote that whole thing, but it's definitely informed by being in a band for like 20 years at that point, or many years.
I mean, the piano is definitely driving it for the most part. It
is. But like, I wanted to Yeah, I wanted to take more of a band approach for that middle section. So yeah, even though I wrote all that, it does have more of a band quality. So yeah, I'd actually never thought of that aspect of humanizing going into your weak heart, but it is interesting that you have a band composed song going into sort of like a lonely, melancholy part of the song that goes.
I mean, I think that that last sequence of the album is just my favorite part. You know, it you know, the you know, humanizing the distance at the end kind of feels like it's just kind of like dissolving, and then it's like super minimal and super quiet for a while. It's like you're like kind of like trying it you know, it in a good way. It kind of sounds like the band is kind of trying to find their footing again, and then this like piano ballad just kind of comes rising out of the ashes, and then it's like this just like gorgeous you know, just kind of classic prog inspired sounding piano piece that sounds like it sounds like the classic prog song that never existed, you know, you never heard before back in the day, and then it just goes off the wall again during the middle section. And yeah, but that's enough ass kissing from me.
It is a really beautiful song, and I think it's a really great just example of cheer accident, because like you would not hear many bands have that sort of progression in a song, or certainly on an album even more so.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I appreciate that description, Connor. I've never heard kind of describe the whole, you know, that whole song. So that was good.
Thanks. So a lot of my questions are pretty open-ended. I wasn't entirely sure how exactly to ask them, but one thing that Cheer Accident is very known for is odd time signatures, and especially polyrhythms, I think. And I kind of wanted to know more about like how you approach or even feel polyrhythms and odd times. Like, do you break it down into like 3s and 2s, which is something that I do, or do you feel like, or you just say, okay, this part is in 17/8, and then you know, write it out that way, and you know, what's kind of your how do you kind of work with odd meters?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely subdivide it. You know, who wants to count to 17, you know?
Right.
And a fair amount of it is just felt. It's just getting to know the larger pattern. And I mean, it seems like everyone in Cheer Accident has this obsessive side where they're willing to just listen to something, you know, 70 times in a row to get inside of it. As far as writing it out, well, I don't know if you meant that literally, but we don't write out a lot of our stuff. It's mostly rote. It's mostly just
ROTE.
I mean, if it was ROTE, right? If it hadn't been for, you know, recording technology, I don't even know how we would do a lot of the stuff we do, because Jeff and I both just will record something and then, you know, sculpt it from there, you know, tweak it.
Yeah.
A general idea, and then shave off parts, add parts, you know. And so thanks, Les Paul, for the whole overdubbing thing. And now with Pro Tools, like, now with Pro Tools, I didn't get Pro Tools until 2013, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I hear it's great.
Um, I really like that you can. I mean, you can go two different routes. I mean, you can become really exacting and sterile with it, which I guess is whatever. Not that mainstream music matters at all, but like that's the route that mainstream rock music has gone. Just like, ooh, like, created in a lab type rock music. Like we know exactly what rock is now. So you can go that route with it, but you can actually go the opposite route and take spontaneous, like completely spontaneous moments and work with those. And that's really exciting to me. And like, you can record a solo, you can loop it and record a solo like 30 times over the same spot and take the most ridiculous version, like, so right. In a way, more, well, in a big way, I think it's actually more freeing,
Yeah, totally. One thing I always thought was interesting about your drumming style, well, maybe interesting to some people more than others. Well, you play open-handed, right? Which I don't do. I was kind of curious if are you a lefty or a righty?
See, that's the problem. I'm undoubtedly supposed to be a lefty, but my kindergarten teacher lived in the dark ages, and I would be, using a pencil with my left hand, and she would literally take it from my left hand and put it into my right hand because I guess lefties are evil or something.
Wow, they thought they could correct it up till quite recently, quote unquote correct.
Yeah. And I hear that leads to emotional issues. I haven't seen any signs yet.
I think you're just fine.
So when I started playing drums, I never had lessons, and in fact, in junior high, I wasn't allowed to. Like, we would all go to the band room, and we all, like 3 or 4 friends, would go to the band room instead of eat lunch during our lunch hour, and we would play on like the marimba and the drums and all these instruments. And the director came in once, and he literally said to me, "You're a trumpet player. You don't play the drums." he wouldn't allow me to play the school drum set.
Wow.
So I learned on my own, and as with everything, I learned incorrectly, and that's just part of the wrongness of it all.
Right. Because I think it's interesting that a lot of lefty players just kind of flip the whole kit around, so the snare is on the right side, and then you don't use a floor tom, which is another thing that I found interesting. I actually didn't realize that until recently, like looking closely at the videos, like, oh, he doesn't actually have a floor tom there when he's using his own kit. But yeah, you instead just play open. And then another thing I've noticed is that, when most drummers, when they play open, they actually still have the ride on the right side, but you actually move it to the left side as well, which I think, if you're going to play open, to me, that makes more sense, because otherwise you have to switch off which hand is playing snare and which one is on the cymbal. Which I always thought, why would you do that? Why would you do it that way? But it just seems like a more complicated way to learn it. But I guess, to me, your solution of doing it seems more natural to me. If you're gonna play lefty and you're gonna not flip the kit, that seems like the most logical way to do it to me.
It was always really just the simplest solution for me. I mean, when I see it on video, it looks odd,
Right.
but it doesn't feel odd at the time.
What about that missing floor tom too? I'm curious if there's a story behind that, or you just like never liked them, or what?
I muttered that when you were talking about that earlier. One less noun.
One less noun?
Yeah.
Just one less thing to deal with.
I'm anti-noun.
Aren't all the drums nouns though?
Yeah.
They are. So but you want to limit them. I know you're thinking, well, why have any toms? But then that would be a Dead Rider song. So
It'd be a Deerhoof song. Greg Saunier doesn't play with toms anymore. I've seen Deerhoof live. I saw them twice in I think 2017, and he was just using a crash ride, a snare, and kick, and that's all he had.
I love Greg so much.
I do too.
Yeah, but I was actually referencing a specific Dead Rider song, which is called
Arranged Marriage to No Toms.
There you go.
I was gonna chime in.
I see.
And I think I'm not sure if it's accurate. I think like the first album has no toms on it, or just minimal. I think there were some used on later albums, but I thought that was cool.
Oh, I mean, there's definitely some used on later albums.
Yeah, definitely.
Weird marriages. Oh yeah, no, there's toms all over the place, even on Raw Dense, the second album. There's the nervous breakdown drum duet.
Mm-hmm.
Crickets.
That's I don't remember that one, but I'm glad Dead Rider came up because that's an interesting. I know Todd Rittman has been mixing or just mastering, and he's been engineering a lot of the Cheer Accident stuff on the subscription site. So
yep.
And Dead Rider is an amazing band. It's actually the first time I saw you live. You were playing a Dead Rider opening for Free Salamander exhibit. And you were wearing a leather jacket with no shirt. So that was an interesting first impression I had of you. But Dead Rider is an amazing band, and you and Todd Rittman go pretty far back, right?
Yeah. He was part of that mid-90s explosion that happened in Chicago where all hell broke loose. Like when the first time I saw US Maple, I'm like, all right, here we go, because in the mid to late 80s, it was just so post-punky, it was real narrow. I mean, I'm being maybe a little unfair, but things really opened up in the 90s where I felt like people were bringing in a lot more influences, to the table. And there was this band called Shorty who were really good, really good rock band. I mean, somewhat in the Jesus Lizard vein. And Mark Shippey was in that band. Mark and Al were both in that band, and they joined Todd Rittman and Pat Sampson to form US Maple. And I expected them to be Shorty too, but the first US Maple show I saw at Metro was just mind blowing. They already had their language, and apparently they just kind of talked for several months before they even played a note. They talked about what they didn't want to do, and I think that comes through. It's like, okay, we're not going to be this. Like,
seems like
it's kind of like the principle of art coming from self-imposed limitations.
Exactly.
I don't want to do this. I want to confine myself to these specific parameters, but do whatever I want within those parameters.
Yep.
It's an approach that's worked for many artists.
As Brian Eno said when talking about, the more modern keyboards, he's like, who wants to be able to make any sound, like every sound, every possible sound? Like, who wants to be able to do that? Like, limitations are the bomb,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. U.S. Maple, seriously, one of the most unique bands you could name, and also a band that, like, really there's actually one band I heard recently called Radon Chong from Pittsburgh. That's the only band that seems to have any connection to the U.S. Maple sound. They sort of stood alone, and then they were gone. And yet I feel like there's sort of a parallel in approach with you, in that you very much have your own independent voice. You're absolutely not trying to serve any particular audience, but you have a just like very self-directed and unusual goals maybe for what you're doing.
Yeah, I think again, it's back to you kind of have to be there ethos. It's just, what do you want to do in the room with these 2 or 3 or 4 other people? Like, do you want to recreate something, or do you want to see what, like, these people can do, And US Maple took that really far. I mean, you can hear everybody's individual personality shining through with, like, everything they did, and yet they did have a sound. They actually created a sound, a group sound. And yeah, back around that time, like a little bit after US Maple had been going for a while, I think Talker was the first album where Todd and I started our show and tell tradition. Like, he would play me the latest US Maple, and I would play him the latest Sheer Accident. And I think when Talker came out, that would have been when we had finished Salad Days. I could be wrong about that. But we got together like several times and played each other, our latest albums. And that was always really enjoyable.
Did he give you a lot of feedback? Would he ever, like, something he said, would that send your work in a different direction?
Yeah, he said once that he didn't like when acoustic guitars and electric guitars played the same thing at the same time. So then we did Autumn Wind as a Pirate. Fuck you, Todd!
Why did he not like that particular sound? It's a kind of common way of layering things, I think.
You'd have to ask that. I don't know what goes into that guy's noggin.
Maybe someday we'll get him on the podcast.
No, but he did end up. I mean, you really, like. I mean, he and I have had some of the best music conversations like possible. I think actually, he's a really good person to talk to. But yeah, it was fun playing him introducing Lemon, because I mean he did really, really love that album. So that, his issue with acoustic guitars was, I guess, out the window, at least for that first song.
Right. That's a real standout song in your discography, I'd say, too. That's one of my real top favorites. And another one to play to someone to just blow them away and make them think, I have to get into this band.
Yeah, well, that whole phase of the band was really interesting, really, really fertile. I mean, ironically, we first got Jamie to be in the band so that we could do a bunch of our old stuff live. And he and I would go to this restaurant often together called Athens. He and I both lived in the Rogers Park area in Chicago. And he was a really, really good friend of mine. in the, by the late 90s, we saw a lot of each other. And, we would talk about everything under the sun, but, Phil had died and we were floundering. Like, Dylan and Jeff and I would get together occasionally and just jam a bit. And we weren't feeling it. I mean, like for many months we were really just floundering, and I didn't even know.
It must have been tough to have such a good friend pass away.
Mm-hmm. Yep, really good friend. Like, I mean, one of my best friends. One of my best friends, an incredibly important part of Cheer Accident. So nothing was really happening. And I talked to Jamie. I'm like, yeah, maybe to just, I don't know, jumpstart the band. Like, I was thinking of doing some live shows and just playing some of the stuff that already exists, and he's like, well, that works out because I'm in the process of learning the entire Cheer Accident catalog.
I think you could get that done in a weekend, probably.
If anyone could, Jamie could.
But I just love the ambition in just like casually noting that you're working on that. It's impressive.
Yeah. So ostensibly, he joined the band to play songs that already existed, but the first thing that happened when we all got together in the practice space was all this music just started coming out. That guy's like a total, he's an endless well of musical ideas. And so, yeah, that back then we would get together on Sundays and we would have these like 8-hour practices. So like a couple hours would be spent playing older stuff, and then a couple hours of complete id vomit, and then like 4 hours of hashing out new stuff. And that's where stuff like Autumn Wind is a Pirate came together,
Well, it sounded like new life and like just what you needed. And I'm so glad you guys kept pushing it, because there was obviously so much more of the story to tell after that. Connor, should we do Nick's questions? Nick
I
had
was
some
just
shorter
thinking
questions. So here is the pseudo presence of Nick Prol participating. Hi, Nick, we love you. And here's what he wanted to ask.
All right, so Nick's first question was, do you still, when experiencing writer's block on a song, go out on the streets and pay vagrants to fight each other to the death so you can get inspired?
No, we never paid any of those people.
Oh, okay, they just did it for free.
Yeah.
They're not in it for the money.
No. I wonder if he's referring.
Sorry.
I wonder if he's referring. Hey, maybe you can write to me. Are you referring to when we would play Filet of Nod for like 8 hours in the park and people would intervene?
That was actually on our list of questions, but did people get upset when you did that? And like what inspired the idea to do that?
Well, literally, I mean, that lock groove part in Filet of Nod has always been open-ended. Like, I mean, it only lasts for 5 minutes on Dumb Ask, but like
only
literally our first live show ever, which is on July 17th, 1987, we played Filet of Nod, and I think we did the repetitive part for at least 10 minutes. So the 5 minutes version is just arbitrary. So yeah, the natural inclination is like, oh well, let's just do this all day. Why not? You know? And
Yeah,
I love the idea of being like the static element in a scenario. Like we're just going to be doing this, and you know the world can keep happening around us. You know, and that ends up being the piece. Not to go all John Cage on your ass, but it does
yeah.
kind of highlight everything else that's going on, and like it's endlessly interesting to me when we're playing that song because like there's all sorts of musical things happening with it. You know, there's sirens, people talking, like all sorts of stuff going on, and plus you get to be in a completely meditative state. So it's really
so it is actually kind of a lot like, because I know that you know, John Cage's kind of idea behind 433 was basically to convince, you know, get people to listen to this like ambient sound around them and perceive that as music in a way. So it seems like you're, you know, what you were doing with Filet of Nod is taking the outro and playing it for like hours on end just in a park is kind of like, it's kind of got a similar kind of motive behind it to like incorporate natural ambience and just make that just as much a part of the piece as the piece itself.
That wasn't the motive, but it ended up serving the same function. Like
I see.
Because when we did that part initially, you know, when we talk about John Cage, and we could compare it to other people too, probably. It ends up being somewhat cerebral, but like it's like really at bottom, we just wanted to do this fucking groove, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's not an intellectual exercise. It's like we want to fucking hear this groove for a long time. And sure, it turns into this absurd thing, but it also better fucking groove, because that's a big part of it. Like it's not just, oh, look at how wacky we are, or whatever. I know that's not even remotely what you were just saying, but yeah, the John Cage overlap, the 4 minutes and 33 seconds overlap, ended up happening when we would do it in the park for 7 or 8 hours. It became more of an ambient, you know, we became like this ambient fixture, and that's when we got to notice all these other. So that's when it overlaps. But the initial intent wasn't that.
I see. Yeah, more of a side effect.
Say that, but
more of a side effect. Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe this is something I was going to talk about later, but it seems like maybe this connects here. There was also recently a video on the subscription site where there was a little ditty about sailing around the horn of Cape Hatteras. And when you do that, all you get is horn, horn, horn. I don't think you've seen this, Connor, but essentially Tim is singing this, and then the whole band is singing it just a cappella, and it goes on and on and on, and finally Tim like climbs into the bass drum and continues singing it sort of through a froggy voice, and it just, you think it's gonna stop, and then you realize it's still going on, and you think it might stop, and it reminds me a little of sometimes in comedy you'll like have a really dumb joke and you keep repeating it into like it's not funny anymore, but then it becomes funny again, and then it becomes not funny again, and then it becomes funny. And I feel like sometimes that happens in this zone of repetition because people start thinking all these things like, why are they playing it so long? Like, what are they trying to do? Why am I still watching it? Am I still interested? What am I thinking about? So there's sort of the John Cage element, but there's also the what the fuck element. And in some Cheer Accident music, well, I can get to the next piece. What were you going to say, Connor?
Oh, I was just going to say a lot of droney music in general has that effect on me, where I'll go like, you know, for the first few minutes I'll think, oh, this is really cool, and then I'll start to think this is getting a little bit boring, and then I go into like a third headspace if it goes on even longer. That's like, you know what? I'm just kind of getting lost in this right now. You know?
Right. It's another headspace that's like you start off in your normal, like, I'm expecting a song to go to a different section.
Like I want it to do something else, but then you have to accept that it's not going to do anything else, and you just kind of are with it, you know?
And it might develop
it can
in
be a
some
hard
other
thing
way
to achieve. Yeah.
That's really slow or different, or maybe the development is that it doesn't develop. But again, it's a sort of unique thing that's done in the band. And what I was going to get to, even though I'm jumping ahead, is that sometimes I wonder if it's by accident or by design, that sometimes it seems like the band likes to sort of fuck with the audience, subverting expectations like in a really subversive way beyond just, you know, having a surprising chord in the bridge. There's, you know, all sorts of way outside the box ways to do that. And is that something that interests you? It seems like it is, but like how much of it is fucking with the audience and how much is really just, you know, no, you're just like following the creative muse and that's what ends up happening. I don't know if it's possible to answer that.
I don't think it's fucking with the audience. I think it's fucking the audience. It's
consensually,
making love. Actually, I was just talking about this idea the other day. There's this guy who's supposedly writing a book about us. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Hi, Joe. He came up to us after our all keyboard show at Empty Bottle in 2015, and he said, someone really smart should write a book about you guys. And I'm like, you're really smart. And
thanks for volunteering.
Yeah, exactly. But my friend Joe was talking about this inside joke aspect of the band, and I really loved what he had to say about that. He said that, sure, you know, he's seen many people get alienated over the years in, you know, various audiences, but he thinks that we include people in the joke. Like we let people in, like we actually want to welcome people. And he actually said that he thought we were very uncynical. And I really appreciated that because I really fucking hate cynicism, actually. I think it's the opposite of being critical. I think it's you know, it's the polar opposite of being mindlessly optimistic. It's like, oh, these people are doing this for bullshit reasons. This is gonna suck, whatever, you know.
Well, it's kind of, like, it's nihilistic, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's uninteresting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really happy that he said that. I mean, sure, we're fine alienating people. Like if no one wants to put themselves into it in any way, that's their prerogative, and that's a fine consolation prize for us if they want to be offended. Like that's mildly amusing if people want to be offended, but that's not where the real fun is. You know, the real fun is like, oh, let's go somewhere together. I mean, now I'm sounding overly hippie or something because I don't think it's really that either, you know. But yeah, I still have this friend, very good friend, had refused to see us for many years because she had heard that we abuse our audiences.
Oh,
that seems a bit harsh.
I just thought it was incorrect, but I guess the example you're talking about, that Cape Hatteras thing, I mean, that was just us taking a blues jam, and going, I guess, kind of far with it, and before you know it, I'm being held upside down by a Zeta, and my head's in the bass drum, like you mentioned. But that piece doesn't really fall into the trance realm. I think that's just taking a specific aspect of the Chicago blues and just driving it home. And those words came from Jeff Libersher's head, of course. You know, same territory that, you know, Campo Physique comes from. That guy's just an endless wealth of id vomit, you know. Mind-boggling, really.
Indeed. So that's just sort of an example of focusing on something and then sort of taking it all the way, and like no half measures on that. You explore it to the fullest extent, even if everyone leaves, that's fine.
It's basically extended improv, but using material that sounds on the surface ultra familiar. You know, it's like what's more obvious than like a blues melody with a but it's like it's taking that and like doing something else with it. And it's funny talking about it this way because it sounds overly intellectual or something,
right?
Completely the opposite of intellectual, and anyone that sees it will recognize that immediately.
And I imagine it's not like you planned that out. That was something that happened in the moment, and everyone just went along with it. Like as over the course, like everyone in the band starts singing along with you, and
yeah.
So they're supporting that, you know. So you have to be around the people around you. Have to be willing to go on that journey with you and back you up on it.
Yep. That's completely what that is. Like, yeah, that would not exist if you didn't have like almost infinite trust of the people that you're surrounded by. And, you know, and audiences allow you and encourage you to do different things. I mean, that's why I really love improvisation, because you come upon things that you would never in a million years do just left to your own devices, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, let's do Nick's other questions before I get back to this because we're getting into deep waters, which is where I want to be.
Right.
I have these. If I'll just ask Nick's second question.
Oh, sure.
Is the old rule everyone knows that every song needs a gong still relevant, or should we as songwriters progress past that? I know you like following rules like that, so you've probably observed the gong rule.
Rule of Gongs.
Yeah. Gosh, I want to be accurate with this answer, because I just want to say right from the get-go that that's probably been our most important rule. Like during the entire existence of the band, you gotta fucking get a gong in there. Like no matter what genre you're working within, there has got to be a gong in there somewhere. Like maybe for an intro, or obviously for like the end of a song. There's nothing like a gong. Like
now, could it be a metaphorical gong, or does it have to be a literal gong?
I think it has to be literal. Yeah, metaphorical gong. I don't think you're treating the gong with enough seriousness.
That's true. It's a very serious thing, the gong.
So we've always been really literal with our usage of the gong, and at the same time, I have to tell you that I don't think we've ever used a gong.
Right.
But your zero uses of gong have all been very literal.
Well, the zero is the shape of a gong as well. A big zero is like a big gong.
I really, really like that. That's really
a scary thing to think about. That's blowing my mind.
I don't know that we needed that. I think that's like one or two steps beyond, because that almost gets into rationalization territory. But I still really appreciate that you said that.
I think I can connect that too, because a zero could be considered a sort of vacuum. And the next question was about the vacuum, which of course opens the 1997 album Enduring the American Dream. And I think that's, of course, it's a unique way on its own to open an album, but also in the context of the previous releases, you had sort of tended to start out the albums with something a little more strong and direct. So what did it mean to you for that album and in general to have that long vacuum introduction? I feel like it represented things in the context of the album's meaning. Would you say?
You know, I told the whole story of I kind of want to direct people to this article that was recently written.
We can do that. We can put the link on the video.
It's not a video, it's just an article.
I mean, on our video, we can make a link to the, if you send it to us.
Yeah, I would say unless you have like other questions, but I kind of answer that pretty fully in this interview we did with our friend Andrew, who lives in England these days. I mean, I love talking about that era, but I don't know. It would.
Okay. Yeah. We'll use this time for more unique content then. And let's see. There's a couple other questions on Connor's list, but I think they would maybe make sense to get to at the end. So let me go to what I have here. So the process of collaboration, we've touched on this some. You've obviously, over the course of your career, there have been a lot of different people in Cheer Accident. You and Jeff are the longest serving, but there's been other people who've been in the band for long periods of time. Chris Block, Phil Bonnet, many others. Have you learned anything about, especially with Jeff, which over 30 years you've been working together, what have you learned about what makes a good collaborator and a fruitful relationship? Like what makes something like that work and keep going like you've kept it going?
For me personally, it involves openness. Like I tend to be the guy that squeezes everything through the tube, so to speak. And
what do you mean by that?
So, like taking the raw material and sculpting it in various different ways. I spend more time doing that than writing stuff from the bottom up. Like Jeff, like we were just saying, he's like this endless wealth of material, and we haven't been working this way as much recently for various reasons. We both want to get back to it. Like I remember working on Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch in this way. Like he had several riffs and we would just hash them out. I mean, I imagine you do this with Mercury Tree. But Jeff is like the most open person I've probably ever met. And we complement each other very well that way, because I tend to take things and mold them into something pretty quickly, whereas he tends to just have this flow, I mean, I'm simplifying our relationship, but that is definitely one important aspect of it.
So you're more of a molder and he's more of a flower. So that means like if he writes, so does that mean if he writes some guitar riffs, he'll let them just continue to morph around, whereas you would sort of pick one and say, I'm going to base this part of the song on this? Is that what that means?
Yeah. Of course, he's gotten a lot better at just envisioning entire songs. So like in some ways, what I'm saying is sort of like 20 years into the past tense, because I mean, every song on Fades is a Jeff Libersher song.
Then that's a great thing to note, because that is actually one of my favorite Cheer Accident albums, and I was stunned to find out that all the songs were written by Jeff, because it fits in quite well with the preceding albums, but it also, more than some of the recent albums, it feels very much of a piece, and I know a lot of the songs came from the subscription, and they may not have been written at the same time, but somehow when they're all on the same album, it really feels like one piece. So I think that's a really amazing accomplishment. How much of so when you say he wrote those songs, does that mean instruments, like how much of the vocals were from him as well in his writing, or was that added by you later?
No, I mean, when I say he wrote practically that whole album, I mean that literally. Like he, obviously he wrote all the guitar stuff, all the bass. He plays all the bass. He wrote all the melody lines. I mean, there's like one little section of one of the songs where I added this supplemental vocal part, but he wrote like pretty much all the melodies, all the underlying structure of the song.
And did I hear correctly at one point that it was originally going to be his solo album, but somehow maybe did you decide it should be a Cheer Accident album, or?
Well, that was an amusing progression, because originally he wanted all those songs to be Cheer Accident. I mean, he doesn't think of himself as having like a solo career or anything like that. I mean, neither do I, even though I have some solo albums. But I mean, pretty much everything he does is for Cheer Accident. But we were in a weird phase where like one of the versions of the band had, imploded, and meanwhile he's, that guy's writing all the time. So we accumulated this huge backlog of songs, and after a while I'm just like, yeah, I don't think we can do this right now. Like as a band, like you should just start recording with Todd, and maybe it can just be like a solo album or something. And Todd always wanted to record a Jeff solo something or other, because he was actually expecting more of the Id Vomit type of thing, like Campo Physique or whatever, like that. Like Todd wanted to do a whole album in that vein with Jeff.
That sounds about right. That sounds like something Todd would like.
And a little bit of a bait and switch happened, because like all of a sudden, Jeff's bringing in these like pretty elaborate songs with like a million overdubs, and it wasn't the Id Vomit thing at all. It was, basically our third pop album when it comes right down to it, in some ways, So we're like a few songs in. I say we because I'm, still involved playing drums and stuff. But like Todd's like, yeah, this isn't going to sound like any Cheer Accident album. And I'm like, Well, if it's not going to sound like any Cheer Accident album, it should be a Cheer Accident album.
Exactly. That's the definition of a Cheer Accident album, is it doesn't sound like a Cheer Accident album. And interesting that you categorize it as the pop album. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that that was my biggest, well, tied with my biggest obstacle going forward with that particular group of songs was I had it in my head, and this is maybe just me being obstinate, but I had it in my head at that time that I didn't want to do an album of Jeff like guitar songs or Tim like piano songs. I wanted to do something completely divorced from our usual way of doing things. And meanwhile, he has like 10 songs that are, you know, pretty Jeff guitar oriented. I'm like, well, maybe we can get to those eventually, or maybe this can be a solo thing. But then once it became apparent that it wasn't going to be like any other Cheer Accident album, I got really excited for it to be one, you know?
Well, I think that was a great choice because it fits in, yet it's unique. It's full of really catchy melodic songs, but it also has that sort of the new krautrockish flavor. And plus you got Nils guesting on it as well. There's some great vocals. I don't know the name of the female vocalist you had, or there might be multiple, I'm sorry, but that also sounds terrific on that album.
Yeah, well, Carla Kilsted's on it, and Dawn
Yes.
is on it.
And it seemed like that was like a Cheer Accident album that got like a fair bit of attention when it was released. Like it seemed like it had got a strong reaction.
Definitely. Yeah, I think some of the prog folks maybe weren't as into it because I could be wrong about that, but it seemed maybe.
Well, it seems like you've always kind of done like a balancing act between, well, I mean, probably not consciously because, you know, you're just kind of doing what you want to be doing, but there's always like the portion of your discography that X group is going to like more and Y group is going to like less, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we do have that narrative going on just as like a touchstone or something, you know, like it's just, I mean, a lot of the times it's facetious, like oh, the prog folks really aren't going to like this, you know, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Steve Feigenbaum still questions my seriousness when I first submitted Fear Draws Misfortune to him, well, the idea of it to him, I said that we were recording our tailor-made cuneiform album.
I heard that. I wondered how much of a joke that was.
I mean, funnily enough, it's not a joke. Like, I think he still thinks we were being like 70% facetious, but like, it kind of wasn't a joke. I mean, we wanted to do an album that was, you know, pretty, and we don't really do this very often, actually, like set out to do a type of album.
I was gonna say, is that the first time that you said like we want to be on cuneiform? We're gonna write. We have some music that we think is perfect. It'll be right up their alley, and we can use that to launch our career, the fame and fortune that cuneiform always provides.
I think it's still our biggest seller on cuneiform. I'm almost positive that's true. Some of it has to do with when it came out, but
like good timing.
Oh, yeah, like it was right before CDs became almost completely a non-issue. But no, we really did set out to make a certain type of we really just wanted to pursue that side of the band, like the more RIO. I mean, somewhat serious, really.
Yeah,
like
it's more on the serious side, a little less humor, a little less wackiness.
I mean, it still rears its head, but like we keep it at bay for the most part. And it was, like we were talking about earlier with setting limitations,
yeah.
We wanted to set a limitation in that direction. I mean, it's kind of paradoxical and amusing maybe for the limitation to be really ambitious rock music.
Right.
But
that would not be a limitation for most bands. You're right. But that, let's see. So, okay, maybe I can connect this here. This is also sort of in collaboration, but on the subject of collaboration. But something I was not aware of until pretty recently, and I only found out about it because I read about this book coming out. There's this book, which I would highly recommend to anyone watching this, Re-Entries by Scott Rutledge. And I was like sort of vaguely heard his name connected with the band. I thought like maybe he was an engineer or something. But it turns out, this will be new information for you, Tim, that you've been working with him since 1990.
What? Wait.
I know. Well, that's what it says in the book. It may be a work of fiction.
What's his name?
Yes, Scott Rutledge. Yes, I believe, unless I'm mispronouncing it. Yes, but no, I never realized that there was an external lyricist involved in the band. And that's kind of like, that's a little bit different. I mean, there's some bands that have done that, but it's not a real common thing. And also it never struck me that like, there's so many terrible examples with this, but like one of the things with Rush, I can appreciate Rush, but you could always sort of tell that the singer didn't write the lyrics, and was sort of like doing his best to sing these strange words that, maybe didn't come directly from him. But all the Cheer Accident vocals, like the lyrics sounded completely natural, and I just assumed that you had written all of them. So what's it like working with the lyricist? What was it like before you had him, and what's it like when you do write your own lyrics now? How often is that, and how different is that from working with Scott? That's a lot of questions there, but launching point.
Well, it was really huge for me when Scott availed himself for the lyric writing process, because I have hours and hours of like, mostly piano voice stuff that entails me just either singing outright laws or like nonsense syllables. And I am not a prolific lyric writer at all. And so I had the idea, like I knew that Scott spent many hours every day writing, like whatever. And I'm like, how would you like to put words to my laws? And he was totally up for the challenge. And just the fact that he was willing to do that, and we, had some success with it early on. I mean, I can't even express how important that is, because there's so many songs that just wouldn't exist if I hadn't known that someone was there to actually put some content into my melodies,
Can you give some examples on what some of those songs might be?
Yeah. There's so many. I mean, Failure. I guess I'm thinking of the Enduring Era at the moment. Dismantling the Berlin Wall. Dismantling the Berlin Waltz was like a piece that we were doing as a band. So we would have figured out. Yeah, we would have solved that somehow. But
likely a lot of that album wouldn't exist maybe in the same way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And
did he kind of provide the concept for that album then? Like the lyrical concept and the kind of theme?
To some degree, definitely. Like, this is another thing I mentioned in that interview with Andrew. Like, he and I delivered pizzas at the same place, and oftentimes he would get off at like 9 and I would keep delivering until midnight, and we would deliver pizzas together, and we would talk about everything. And like, we had a huge overlap politically, and we were interested in a lot of the same philosophical territory. And you know, he has a master's, I think, in art history, and
Mm-hmm.
he can go off on so many interesting subjects. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of how Enduring was born. We would just like hash out these ideas, and you know, like I said, he's writing all the time. And yeah, I wanted to do an album that had a, you know, a concept to it, and it was a pretty natural emergence the way that all came together. Just it is a result of our friendship. Like, that album definitely would not exist if it wasn't for Scott, you know. There were other questions somewhere in there. I don't know if I.
Well, do you still, like, what percentage at this point of the songs have the lyrics written by Scott, and do you still write lyrics, and how has working with him affected how you write?
That's a really good question. He's definitely affected how I write. I can't say how, but I feel it.
Do you feel more confident writing on your own after this experience? Because you said previously it wasn't something that you felt like maybe you're really good at or can do a lot.
Well, when I write stuff, it oftentimes, I mean, I gravitate toward the melancholy side of things a lot of the time. Like when I sit down to write something, it's almost out of like necessity. Like, I just want to like get this feeling out there. And like, so I find that to be very limiting, like, and not in a good way.
Right.
I mean, it can be a good way. Like, I mean, I have a couple of solo albums that only focus on that world, and I think that's totally fine and legitimate. But like, I don't want to just sing about whatever depressing thing is going on with me at any given moment. Like, I don't want to be limited to that. Like, I want it to extend to other ideas, and I don't have enough distance from my own emotions and melodies to write a lot of words to what I come up with. So
the lyrics you write sound like they're kind of personal in source, so you don't try to, you know, say write as some third party character. You're really yourself when you're singing your own songs. Do you have are there lyrics that you've written, or is there a song you could think of that you wrote the lyrics to that you're really proud of those words?
I actually really happy with this song that's coming out. I was going to say our next album, but we actually have two largely improvisational and noise-oriented albums coming out before. It looks like we're going to have an album in September, October, and November. And
Oh, wow.
September is going to be our Hong Kong album, where we're like jamming with the streets of Hong Kong, basically.
Well, you got to have a gong on that album. The Hong Kong gong.
Is that Neil
Bring the gong
Diamond?
count to 1 at last.
Yeah, there we go. Cheer accident 1, gong 0. Or maybe it's the other way around.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a
So,
song
yeah.
on there that you're proud of lyrically.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was quite a
Sorry.
digression. So let me just get in this parenthetical. So September, our Hong Kong improvised album is supposedly going to come out. October, our album with Dan Burke is going to come out. Dan Burke of Illusion of Safety, one of the best noise bands, in my opinion.
Check them out.
And then I think in November, maybe December, our next Skin Graft album is going to come out. And that's called Here Comes the Sunset.
Ah, I see what you did there.
I wrote the title track to that, and I'm pretty happy with the lyrics and the singing. Like, the vocal quality has something that I think was never quite captured before. It has an element that, I don't know, someone might hear it and be like, oh, I've heard that side of what he does before, but I think it has, I don't know, a quality that hasn't quite come through before. And actually, I'm really happy with the words that I wrote on the first song of that album, which is a song called Star Vehicle.
Star Vehicle.
And then in parentheses, 4 flats.
FOR flats? Or FOUR?
The number 4.
The number 4. What does that mean, 4 flats?
It means that if you're thinking of Cheer Accident as
Oh.
a star vehicle, maybe barking up the wrong bike.
I just got it. It's like flat tires. Okay. Oh, I can't wait to hear these. Maybe you'll send us a preview or something.
Not to give away the store, but you could actually peruse the monthly thing and find almost everything there, if not everything.
Oh, I'm sure I've missed a few as the months go by, but I'll have to try and dig those up. Okay, so those are, of course, people won't be able to listen to that yet, but once that comes out, or if they are subscribers, by the way, you should all subscribe, like and subscribe on cheer-accident.com and get a whole trove of music. So those are some cool songs with lyrics by Tim. And then do you have a song that stands out with lyrics by Scott that is one of your favorites that he's done?
Well, I already mentioned Failure.
Right.
That's up there. I really like Transposition, and there's a story behind those 2 songs, actually. Okay, well, first of all, Failure is a good example of a song where the melody already existed and Scott put the words to the melody. Transposition is a good example of the opposite. And I had his lyrics sitting on the piano one day for Transposition, and I started playing Failure, and I played the wrong chord initially. Gosh, I almost want to demonstrate this.
Yeah.
My
Let's get
piano's
musical
right
here. Live performance by Thymme Jones.
So,
only available here.
So Failure is this. And, I've got the lyrics right here to Transposition, which, doesn't exist yet. And I start to play Failure, and I play this instead. I'm like, oh.
Well, and you sort of transposed it, which is very appropriate.
Nice.
Well, that's great, because I was going to ask about that, the process of writing the lyrics to an existing melody or coming up with a melody for existing lyrics. Obviously, get very different results.
Yeah, well, I failed to play failure and transposed into transposition, but yeah, transposition is like, that might be my favorite song that had lyrics already that Scott, well, you know what? He had the lyrics to, like, yeah, I'm 93% sure that the lyrics to Family Business existed before the melody.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm 98% sure. It might make its way to 100 before this is over. But
I'll have to keep an eye on that.
Well, for myself, just in the past couple of years is the first time that I've tried to set somebody else's lyrics to music, because this project Metafacts I'm working on with Damon Wakus, in fact, we're almost done with it. He wrote all but one of the lyrics for the songs, and they were all in a sort of free verse format. And so that was the first time I'd really tried to take someone else's words and set them to music. It was a really interesting experience. I feel like I wrote very different melodies from what I would have come up with otherwise. And also, you know, just like someone else's words, and his words are very erudite. He has a wide vocabulary. And so, you know, just some of that, the nature of the words themselves affects the melodies. So, I wonder if that was an equally interesting experience for you, or if it was new.
Yeah, definitely. And there, you mentioned that you thought all of the songs sounded like something I would naturally sing, and that hasn't always been the case. Mm-hmm. in my opinion, and that can be this back and forth that Scott and I sometimes have. Like, he has sometimes intentionally written a word that he knows would be somewhat difficult for me to sing.
Unsingable or difficult to scan.
I mean, not unsingable, but just a little awkward, and like, just, you know, something that he knew would take me out of my comfort zone. And sometimes that works really, really well. I mean, there's some pretty ridiculous phrases on the song Facialization, for instance. I mean, I think that song works totally fine. But there's some pretty ridiculous phrases to try to spit out in that song. I mean, it's my fault for writing the melody that does that. But so I guess it was kind of like payback's a bitch or something, because God put all the, you know, syllables to the words, or to the melodies. So, but there are examples of songs where there'll just be a word here and there where I'm like, I don't quite love how that sits.
And would you like suggest to him maybe an alternative? And
oh yeah, there have been definite occasions where I've been like, yeah, this really doesn't work. And sometimes I'll get pretty pissy with him, you know? Like, oh, okay, really? Come on. Like, but you know,
is Scott a musician at all, or is he just purely a writer?
He is a bass player. He has definitely some harmonic knowledge, and he's got a really deep grasp of like a lot of different music. Like he's yeah, I think it helps that he knows music.
I would think so, yeah. But also,
Yeah.
I mean, still, if your focus is on being a writer, you still sort of have a little bit of an outsider perspective, which is probably what you want from this.
Yeah, you're right.
At least outside your own head.
Exactly. And I was going to say when I was talking about being pissy, like I have to have some humility about this shit because like I said, there's, probably 70% of what I've written wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Scott. So like I don't get to be on some kind of high horse, like he's doing the impossible from what I can tell. Like I don't even get how he puts words to this stuff. I mean, like it's still a mystery to me. And I mean, I have other examples of collaborators. Actually, I think you referenced the cassette, Vasectomy.
Yeah, I love that. That's up on Bandcamp for anyone who wants to check it out. A little lesser known entry in your discography, I think.
that first song on that album, Eyes Will Alter.
Beautiful song.
I really like how those words turned out, and those
are yours.
What?
Those words are yours, right? You hadn't met Scott at that point.
My friend Jane Bozek.
Oh, okay.
She wrote those words, and she's a musician also. But I think those are perfect. I really dig those, and
yeah,
they
caught my attention for sure.
There's some words that Amelie wrote on Putting Off Death that are like, well, Putting Off Death and Chicago 20 that are like mind-blowingly good, I think. I mean, like the words to the song Hymn,
mm-hmm.
Hymn, the last song on Putting Off Death. I think those are pretty remarkable words. And there's a Jeff song from Chicago 20 called Things. And those are really something else. I mean, I don't think it gets any better than that, honestly. And when Scott heard that song, he was actually a bit jealous. He's like, wow. He's like, she really did something.
Wow,
there.
That's quite a compliment. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you could say that whatever world she was tapped into is, I don't know, intersectional with some of the stuff Scott gets into. Like really surprising juxtapositions of melody and idea, like an idea that like goes with the melody in a really kind of obtuse way, or even like some of it's pretty fucking creepy, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy with that song, and that's a Jeff song, so I have I have no business even talking about this, but yeah, but those are yeah, well, Him, I definitely like. I was very attached to that melody, and like, yeah, I was ready to be a real bastard about that song because I felt so good about the melody. I'm like, yeah, this
like the words just have to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's
Anyway.
great. That's a great answer. And you know, I think another unique quality is to like have this range of lyrics from different people, and I think over your body of work, there's a real, just like so many forms of depth. But this is another example of that depth, just in the words. So now we're gonna get to the deepest stuff in our remaining time here.
The what?
The deepest, darkest questions. I don't know what you thought I said.
I have a fan in my left ear, and it sounded like you said Ebus.
Oh, okay. Sounds like some mythological figure. But, oh, hey, what are we looking at now?
There's the fan.
Oh, I see. There's more than one fan of yours on this call.
Thanks for joining us, fan.
The Ebus has cometh.
You should tell that fan to like and subscribe.
Okay. All right. So, Tim, are you there?
Oh, hey.
Are you with us? Hello.
Check 1, 2.
Why do you choose to write songs, and what does it mean to you to write a song?
Oh, Jesus Christ. You're giving me that question at this hour?
Well, we've warmed up. Now you should be cooking.
That's kind of, I mean, I'm trying my best to not cop out here, but
well, maybe this will help. Did you ever consider, like when you were growing up, did you ever think you might do something else with your life than make music your main pursuit? And like, if so, I mean, like, how did it end up grabbing you and dominating the way it has?
Okay, well, that's a different question.
No, it's a little maybe easier, but I mean, maybe it'll lead into like why, because having music be your life in what you do means you're choosing to write songs regularly, and sort of like that is the engine of making, and there's other ways to do it, but that's pretty much what you do.
Are you accusing me of being a songwriter?
Yeah, it's not an accusation, it's a fact. It's a factuzation.
That's interesting, because oh my God, I was just embroiled in that very conversation, because Annie, who I've been seeing for a couple of years now, she referenced the fact that I'm writing songs all the time, and she referred to like the albums that are coming out, and I'm like, a lot of that stuff expands over a lot of time, and B, a lot of that material has nothing to do with being a song. So it was weird, because I'll go many months without even touching the piano, and maybe I have some sadness about that, because there used to be a time where I would write songs at the piano like all the time, like pretty much every day. But now that I'm Mr. Default Engineer, I spend a lot of time EQing the drums,
Right.
And I mean, I really don't say that with any kind of dislike or whatever. It's just, but it does sometimes feel like it's getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think of the engineering process as being very important to what we do, because it has to do with manipulating sound, and I want to get further and further into that, and that's really what I guess more of a producer than an engineer does. But like anyway, so let me go to the more general question, which is the doing of the music. I never thought of it as a career or anything like it, and neither did Jeff. Like, we just started working on shit together, and we had no idea where it was going to lead. We just both loved music and started working on stuff together and just never stopped. But I never had a vision of, oh, in 30 years I'm going to be doing this. Like I've never had any pretension that I would be like earning a living doing it. I mean,
you didn't have dreams of being a rock star.
I mean, I wanted to affect people. So if that's part of what a rock star is, I like that part of, I like interfacing with the world. Like like that's great. Like I've never been someone who wanted to just have like pages upon pages of compositions in my drawer that would never see the light of day. I want shit to be out in the world, you know?
Right.
And you know, we definitely play off of the whole rock band thing. Like, I guess we still sort of are a rock band. I'm still a rock drummer. So, but yeah, like music has probably always been the most important part of my life, but it's always been in conjunction with, you know, the life part. Like I never wanted it to be just this one track thing. Like I couldn't really do like what Zappa did. Like that guy would work, you know, 18 hours a day on music. And I think it got to the point where he forgot or just wasn't interested in how things sounded in a room. Like it got so sterilized, and he was able to like put his brain directly to the music, so to speak, but like it left out a lot of what was interesting about his earlier stuff, which actually involved humans. And you know, he makes fun of people saying you got to have that human element because he doesn't require the human element. He just wants the notes and the rhythms to be correct.
Right. But, he was a bit of a sort of dictatorial composer, although he did have his improv sections and his solos that he did. That was a little more human and free.
His guitar solos. Oh my, yeah, he got to just let it all hang out, and that's beautiful. I love his guitar playing. But I guess I'm saying that I'm making this comparison because I've never, I guess I've never wanted music to dictate every aspect of my life. I've always wanted to get plenty of living in at the same time.
But you haven't, decided like, I'm going to have a family now and put down music because, you know, obviously your longevity is one of the really notable things about you, because so many people do it for a few years, or they do it till they get to a certain age. And then they're like, well, you know, I didn't get signed to a major label. I didn't become famous. So I'm just going to put this down and do whatever else. But you never did that. And you must have obviously made choices that like enable you to continue doing what you do.
That's a really, really good point. And it's heartbreaking to me actually when people, I guess a pretty good example of that would be a band like Gentle Giant. Like I forget if you're pro or con Gentle Giant.
Oh, I love Gentle. I mean,
I like Gentle Giant. Yeah.
Some of the albums at the end were not, you know, as great, but I mean, in general, I think they were fantastic band.
Well, that relates to my point. Like they had been a band for like, well, after all was said and done, they were a band for 10 years, and they reached this point after 6 or 7 years where they're like, damn, we gotta like make a living. And and it's too bad. It's too bad that they thought they had to make a living. Like, why not just keep doing that and make a living in other ways? I mean, I guess some of them did end up having families, as you mentioned. That's a variable, but you can do both. I mean, look at Nils and Dawn. They have
right
3 daughters, and they're still really prolific. They still go on ridiculous tours, so it can be done. But yeah, no, I think it's, like I said, I think it's heartbreaking when people have this expectation about where they should be in terms of like material success, and then they don't reach that expectation and they stop. And you're completely correct to point out that I haven't done that, and it has been a conscious choice to avoid needing to stop, you know? And I had this revelation a few years ago. I remember telling Dante, like when we were standing on the porch after practice, and I remember saying to him, you know what? I realized I've been doing it right the whole time. Just kind of flying under the radar, like not like, you know, we're popular enough that, like, you know, it does get into people's ears, it does get into people's consciousness, and like we can have conversations like this, which is pretty amazing. I wish more interviews were like this, actually, where people really get into the nitty gritty of it.
That's great. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
To me, it's all about like interfacing with other brains and hearts and souls who are on the planet with you contemporaneously. And I don't know, Jeff and I both still have our jobs and whatever. That's how we pay the rent, and we still do music all the time. So I don't see, that seems perfect to me. I don't like.
Yeah, I totally on the same page. Yeah, and I wonder if it would have been any different if at some point you had somehow been launched into major commercial success. If that would have changed your direction, maybe not your direction, but your just how you felt about the whole thing, rather than like flying right under the radar. What if it became like really lucrative to do a particular thing, and then you might feel that, I mean, imagine such things could happen. Would you feel locked into it, or feel like you didn't?
The horror in your voice when you said the word lucrative. I think that's apropos. No, you're right, and you actually remind me of a phrase that our friend Brad Schluter said many years ago. I think he was referring to a song. He might have been referring to the middle section in the song "Play School" from "Baby Shouldn't Smoke," but he referred to it as our pop defense mechanism, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we're interested in writing nice, hummable melodies, but we're just as interested in not earning a living doing it. So here you go.
There's always like something subverting it from being just like a normal pop song.
Yeah, and like it doesn't have to be as contrived as the idea of a pop defense mechanism. I mean, I'm just really interested in music that sort of straddles different worlds. Like as I said in that other interview with Andrew, like my ethos is sort of, if I'm going to do something sort of harsh or textural or noise oriented, I want to take some sort of pop approach to that. Like I want it to have some kind of hook to it. Like you mentioned, Vacuum. Like you just mentioned that piece, and I can hear how that sounds. Like that, to me, that's almost a pop song because it has like a particular character to it, and you could almost say a hook. Like maybe that doesn't quite make sense, but at least it makes some sort of analog, I think, to that.
It has
idea.
a hook in a non-traditional way.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It reels you in. You know, it does. I think it does hook you in a sense. And on the other hand, when we're doing pop music, I want there to be questions. You know, I don't want it to just be this mindless like. I don't want it to just be a distraction or wallpaper or just or milk toast. Like there has to be some earning it involved.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about pop is that, you know, you can listen to it and immediately enjoy it. But if it's all surface level, then you get really fast diminishing returns from it. And so I'm always looking for stuff that, you know, I can enjoy it right away. I get it stuck in my head, and that makes me want to go listen to it again. And I get something else out of it the next time I listen to it.
Right, some sort of depth or layers.
And it's a really hard thing to like describe, like, you know, what it is that you get, but you just notice nuances about the song that you just didn't notice before. And it's like the difference between like cookie cutter pop and like real like XTC kind of like sophisticated pop. And that's one of the things I really love Sheer Accident for, is, you know, your ability to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for that, because that's what we're going, like we want to make stuff that people want to listen to multiple times. I mean, you know, music for obsessives basically. But and I actually want to agree with everything you just said, but I guess I also want to try to disagree with what you said, because I have a question about that. I remember being in 6th grade and buying the latest Three Dog Night single, which at the time was a song called The Show Must Go On. And I would come home for lunch. So I would have like basically 35 minutes to eat my lunch and then go back to school. And after I bought that single, I would listen to it like 6 times in a row while I was eating lunch. And I don't think that song's particularly deep or like innovative or like nuanced or layered, but I was still compelled to hear it a lot. And I can think of other examples like that, like a lot of...
That's true.
Like, I mean...
Like if it resonates with you, you know?
Like the song, let's just come up with the most mainstream example we can come up with, like the song Sour Girl by Stone Temple Pilots. Like, I love that song. Like,
it's a good song.
The lyrics are like almost completely vacuous. There's nothing groundbreaking about it, but I've never gotten tired of it, you know? So like, we could probably spend like 7 hours talking about this stuff. Like,
just talking about Sour Girl.
Exact. Well, like what makes something quote unquote deep, or like that you desire to revisit, like something that continues to give you something after repeated listens. Like, I don't know if it needs to be all that sophisticated or not.
I guess I didn't mean to imply that it has to be, but that was something that I, you know, really like to seek out in what I listen to, because I am of the obsessive type where I find one, I'll hear all kinds of things and like try out all like listening to all different kinds of things. And most of it is like, yeah, this was cool, but I don't think I'm compelled to listen to it again. But then I'll like find that one thing that I'll just listen to 100 times. And, I just try to break down, why do I want to listen to this 100 times? Why didn't I want to listen to this other thing 100 times? Maybe there was a whole other world here that I could have explored and, made part of my, musical aesthetic. So it's, my process as like a growing artist and musician has been trying to suss out like, what is it about this that works for me, and trying to replicate that with, the music that I do. I guess is the most eloquent way I can think of to describe it. But yeah, I didn't mean to like shit on like things that are like, that are simple. I certainly don't want to shit on things that are simple,
No,
because I think there's a lot of power and simplicity as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a different kind of power,
Yeah, I think it gets really tricky to talk through a light. It gets tricky to figure this shit out, like, because, we all know, and I don't put either of you in this category, but we all know people that are pretty damn elitist, and they act like that there's some sort of hierarchy between like, difficult music, the difficult deep music and the superficial pop music. And it's like, that's not where I've landed. I mean, I get why people come to that just because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously a song like Vacuum isn't going to get played, 10 times a day on any radio station, but it is too simplistic to look at it that way. And Connor, I kind of want to propose a challenge for you.
Oh God.
Because I know that, I forget how this came. I think you guys were on tour, and it came up that you always skip the last song on Not a Food. And I think the word you used for it, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the word you used for it was random. It's too random.
I can't remember exactly. I probably something like excessive or extra. Like I just, I always thought it was just like kind of like a neat little Easter egg at the end of the album. Like I didn't dislike it, but it was like it didn't quite fit with the album. For me, it was like it wasn't cohesive with the rest of it. To me, it was just like, oh, here's like this little remix of the song that we just stuck in at the end.
Well, that's, I mean, now that you flesh that out, I can see that more. But if you were going with the original criticism that I thought you were making, which is just that it's randoms, kind of like nothing really coheres or whatever.
No, that's not the way that I really meant it.
I guess my challenge, if that were the case, my challenge would have been, you should listen to it 10 times in a row and get back to me, because I still listen to that. I'm like, wow, that still really makes sense to me. Like Phil and I spent a long time constructing that. He had just gotten this like delay thing that he put into his board in the 24 track, and we actually edited that song on tape. I mean, I say we, but he had the razor blade. I was just suggesting what moves to make, but it took us like a long time, and it's definitely not gratuitous. I mean, maybe I can see why you would say the inclusion of it on the album it seems gratuitous because it aesthetically maybe it doesn't fit in with everything else. But the piece itself, I'm actually still really pretty happy with.
Yeah.
I would be curious if it like hit you differently if you like actually did spend some time with it, and if it still doesn't nail you, I would like to hear that too, because I really like how your brain works, and both you and Ben, like, so I'm always interested to hear any kind of process or evolution or whatever the fuck. Anyway, blah blah blah.
We actually, I think we played that song after we hadn't listened to that album in a while. We played it in the van, and I thought that like the phone was skipping, which is again a sort of performance arty aspect to it. But the funny thing is, like, I have had things screw up that made a song sound like that when it wasn't supposed to. So the fact that you did it intentionally is really great. And plus, like, it's ridiculous how hard you had to work at the time to create that effect, because like now in Pro Tools, you could like chop, it's like a style, chopped and screwed, I think, or whatever it's called. You can very easily
glitch.
make all those edits. I know all about the latest genres because I'm a vital young man. But it's no, it's again, like, and it's also really the only Cheer Accident song that sounds like that. So in that's sort of the definition of a Cheer Accident song in a way. A good one.
Oh, it's funny. I read this review that talked about that song, and in parentheses, whoever wrote the review wrote, that was Steve's idea.
What?
Yeah,
that doesn't seem like a Steve Albini type of idea, does it?
Like, yeah, the remix king, Steve Albini. Like, that's so bizarre. Like, I mean, he had absolutely nothing to do with that, and would want absolutely nothing to do with that.
Just the words.
It's completely against his aesthetic.
I was going to say, Steve Albini dance remix are words that have never appeared in the same sentence. But maybe it should.
That's just a case of like, oh, that's the most famous name associated with this album. We're going to like just attribute all these things to that person, which of course he hates that, which is why he goes out of his way to refer to himself as an engineer and not a producer. You know, he does everything he can to divorce himself from that, and people still do it because that's what they do. I honestly, people do that about Cheer Accident in regard to me. Like,
right, they just assume everything was your idea. I've fallen into that myself, I'm afraid, because like you're a strong personality clearly, and you have a lot of I was gonna say a lot of vibe. That sounds really stupid, but you like have a particular thing that seems like, oh, this is like Cheer Accident in a person, but it really is more complicated than that.
Hey Ben.
Yeah.
Do you dig my vibe?
I'm on your vibe trip currently. I'm on a certain vibe trip, and sometimes I get on a trip of a different.
I'm on your vibe wavelength, my dude.
I'm
on the wave. I'm not always on the length, but I'm always vibing whenever I can.
I'm more of a wave girth guy.
Oh, I'm not going to follow that particular thread, but
yeah, let's not. But yeah, like I guess you're right about like I'm sort of like the face of Cheer Accident or something. How's that for a nauseating
you're the like
term?
front man. You're the like. What do they call like the like beautiful but dumb, like long-haired front man, and really the band's doing all over? I don't know what I'm thinking of. But no, I think people have that idea.
But yeah, I mean, I project my personality into the world more frequently than Jeff does. You know, that's really all that comes down to.
And it seems like the others are sort of like happy to let you have that position.
Yeah. Oh, there he goes again. Yeah. Anyway, gosh, it wouldn't be hard to talk to you guys for another 6 hours, but I actually got to go pet a cab pretty soon.
How soon? Do you have like 10 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm almost at the end of my questions. But one thing, there's more sort of talked about. I'm going to go to what I think I think this connects to one thing that I'm really into is this idea that I only really just like formed into words when writing these questions, but the idea of like the previously unknown musical element. And almost like ties into what we were saying about the XTC vocal melodies. We're like, oh, he goes in note, note, note. Wait, he went to that note? But it's even like a bigger idea, like the next thing you go to, it doesn't even have to be a note, it doesn't have to be a vocal. It could be the sound of like a bunch of boxes falling over. Or it could be the sound of the whole song slowing down and fading out. One thing I love that you did on, I forget what song, but there's some songs that like have a very slow fade out and then a very slow fade back in. Like, who does that? Nobody does that. It's completely unexpected. But it's a musical choice that works, and it's outside the box. And when you make all those outside the box choices, it's like, hey, I'm using all these toys that all these other people, anyone could have thought of this and used it, but they thought, no, that's too silly, or that won't get played on the radio, or whatever they were thinking. Or someone just said, you know. So I just love the idea that the next thing doesn't have to be a regular note. It could be, well, I really love slides. I love a slide up that sounds like a question mark, or, but yeah, I guys just like the next thing the possibility for what the next thing you're going to hear could be is way more wide open than people treat it.
Yep. Well, first of all, that relates to the idea of improvisation, because it's really just, rather than imposing all your ideas onto this moment, you're respecting it and seeing where the moment can lead you. So there's that aspect of it. And also there's the idea that, I mean, one of my favorite things in the whole world is to find yourself in a place that's completely different than like what you thought it was. Like, I'll give you an example of that. My landlord was working on our basement bathroom and our first floor bathroom at the same time. And like all the superficial elements were complete, like the walls were gone, the floor/ceiling was missing. So I was in the basement looking up to like the floor of our second floor neighbors. And like, I just had this thought. I'm like, wow, I really believe in rooms, don't I?
Like, yeah, there's parallels there, aren't there? Why are houses made of rooms?
Like you take like one little wall that took like 2 minutes to put up, and like, oh, this is really what this is. This is a room.
Wow.
It's like,
I think there's a lot there. I mean, compare that to like the structure of a song. The sections are rooms. There's no reason a building has to be made of rooms. Take some time and think about how a building that didn't have rooms could be constructed, what it would look like. And the same thing musically. That's really awesome. I love that. I know we don't have much time, so I'm going to try and get to the end here. Okay, quick question from Andrea, our friend Andrea. Chicken or spaghetti?
Oh, wow.
She says those are the two things that you eat, mainly.
Geez, I'm already low blood sugar. I gotta go to work. And she's asking me to choose, gosh. She's basically asking me to choose between Universe Zero and Henry Cow. How do you do that? God, she's giving me a headache. I'm gonna say spaghetti, because I have more than a little cognitive dissonance about being a carnivore.
I've been getting some of that lately. I don't know why. I never did before, but once in a while, it'll just creep me out. But, you know, spaghetti's good, complex carbs for, you know, long-term cardio. That's supposed to be good for that. So it sounds like a good choice there. All right, so here's my last bigger-ish question, but also a good closing question. Okay?
Okay.
So it's a two-part question. You can take whichever. So what inspires you in music and in life, and what are you most excited about right now? It could be the same thing or different.
What am I most excited about lately, did you say?
Yeah, well, what inspires you,
general?
or what are you most excited about in music and in life right now?
Gosh. Wow, I look like almost totally bald.
Depending on the lighting, you look like you have a ton of hair or none. It's just the background.
Pretty interesting. I look like that older dude in Clockwork Orange. More wine. That guy. I promise I'm not bald. I mean, I have less hair than I used to have. That's for darn sure. But
I think that's what people want to get out of this interview. They want to know how many hairs are on your head. There we go. The old comb forward always does the trick.
7,982. I assure you, most of the follicles are still working. Anyway.
That's a relief.
I guess my short answer is I'm interested to see what happens next, like in life and in music. Like I just want to uncover shit. Like that's, if I can speak for Jeff, like that's his thing too. Like he's still learning stuff. Like every time he does a new song, he learns something. And yeah, that just the seeing what's there thing. That's what I'm interested in music, and that's what I'm interested in as far as people goes. You know, relationships. I don't even really believe in individuals. I think it's only relationships and chemistry. That's the deal. That stuff.
So as long as you're always uncovering something new, that's what keeps you going.
And yeah, and to uncover something new, all you have to do is be paying attention. Like reality does it for you. Just notice, you know.
Well, that's great. That's terrific. And I was going to ask what's coming up next for Cheer Accident, but you said you have 3 albums coming out in the next few months. So we will keep up on those. What's the first one that's coming out? That's
the first one,
the Hong Kong thing you said?
Yep. And that was our keyboardist, our former / current / future keyboardist, D. It was his concept, and he recorded all these field recordings when he was in Hong Kong, and then he kind of charted out basic forms.
You said he charted them out?
What?
You said he charted out?
Charted.
Okay, I thought that's what you said.
You know, I must have a speech impediment, because every time I say the name of the band, people are like, Cheer Accident? I'm like, no, CH.
Yes. It's a hard, people have trouble with that.
I think that's on me. But so yeah, he plotted out general places to go improvisationally, and the sextet version of Cheer Accident recorded a bunch of stuff, and then we sequenced it. And
so the sextet is you, Jeff, D, and horn section. Is that the deal?
Yeah, Ross Feller, Corey Bengtson on. It was also my roommate on saxes, and Mike Hagedorn, of course,
Yeah.
on trombone. God, Mike Hagedorn is the star of that show. He really shines on that album. And then the one after that is actually going to be a cassette, almost 90 minutes long, and it's going to have. There's only going to be 100 copies made. This cassette label called Ha is releasing it.
Wow. I better get my order in. So the cassette, the cassette have a name?
Yeah, it's called Logic is an Infant.
That sounds very Cheer accent. Logic is an infant. And Logic shouldn't smoke.
Right.
And then the third one is going to be on Skin Graft, right? Is that going to be like the most official Cheer Accident album type thing?
That's the one that's going to be climbing up the charts, yeah, out of the three. That's got actual songs on it. And then there's like this surprise album that I keep hinting at in the monthly emails that I hope comes out in 2022. Not going to really say anything about that.
It wouldn't be a surprise. But yeah, that's terrific. So there's so for our numerous viewers, there's a bunch of Cheer Accident music coming on the way. It's going to make this year significantly better, which I think is something we could all use. So that's great. Well, Tim, thank you so much. This has been really awesome. Thank you for your time, and I think this has been a really cool conversation. I think other people are going to enjoy a lot.
Thanks to both of you and to Nick and to Andrea. And I would do this again for 3 hours or however the fuck long it was.
Me too. I'm sure we'll think of more questions for people to ask, and probably we'll get reactions. They're like, why didn't you ask him this? Why didn't you ask him about this song? So maybe another time we'll get to all that. But
cool.
For now, we know you have to go to your pedicabbing. So if you're in Chicago and need to be driven around on a pedicab, Thymme Jones, he's your man.
Wrigleyville.
Very
Take
good.
Care.
Thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.